My parents kicked me out of the house because of my half-sister, and later they lost their house. I never imagined I'd be packing my things into 2 torn garbage bags, walking away from the only home I'd ever known, with the sound of my mother's voice echoing down the hallway, not with love or concern, but with finality. "You made your choice," she said, standing there like a judge at the end of a long trial. "We can't keep doing this." My choice? No, the choice had been made for me the moment my father sat us down and said, "You're going to have a sister now." That was 6 years ago, and I was 15. Her name was Clara, the daughter of his previous relationship, a fact that had somehow never come up in my entire life until she arrived on our doorstep with her big green suitcase and wide, wary eyes. She was 12 then, and for some reason, everyone thought I was supposed to instantly embrace her. But I couldn't. It wasn't because she was younger or because she was new. It was because she became the center of everything almost overnight. My room became our room. My time with mom and dad became family movie nights I didn't ask for. My birthday cake had her name iced beside mine the following year, for our 2 beautiful daughters. I remember standing there, knife in hand, frozen, as everyone clapped and smiled, while I was slowly being erased. At first, I tried to keep it inside. I smiled through gritted teeth. I tried to be the good daughter. But Clara was clever. Not in a genius sort of way, in a watchful, quiet way. She knew how to nod in just the right moment when mom was talking about responsibility. She cleaned her plate. She asked for second helpings of dad's dry spaghetti and made him beam with pride. I once walked into the kitchen and heard her telling mom, "I think she just doesn't like me. But I'm trying. I really am." I never got to say my side. By the time I turned 17, Clara had been in the house for nearly 2 years. Tension was constant. If I left my laundry out, it became a lecture. If Clara left hers, it was, "She's still adjusting." I would come home from school to find her sitting in my old reading chair, flipping through my books, and when I'd ask her, sometimes too sharply, to move, she'd say, "You always make me feel like I don't belong." And that was all it took. Mom's voice would cut in. What did we say about making this a safe space for everyone? Everyone but me, apparently. I'll admit, I wasn't perfect. I raised my voice sometimes. I rolled my eyes more than I should have. There were a few slammed doors and long silences at dinner. But I never imagined it would come to this. It happened 2 weeks after my high school graduation. College was on the horizon, but I had decided to take a gap year, save up, maybe travel, figure out what I really wanted. That decision didn't sit well with them. Especially Dad. "You need structure," he said over breakfast one morning. "You're not ready to drift." But Clara, oh sweet Clara, had just been accepted into an advanced STEM program for the summer. She showed her acceptance letter like a badge of honor. Dad hugged her, told her she was making the right choices. "See," he said to me. "Drive and discipline. You could learn from her." I remember that morning so clearly because it was the beginning of the end. That evening, I found Clara in my room, sitting at my desk, going through my sketchbooks. I'd always loved drawing, it was my escape. And she knew that. "Hey!" I snapped. "Get out of my stuff." She jumped, then looked up at me, startled. "I was just looking. Why are you always so mean?" I tried to stay calm, I did. "This is my room, Clara. Can you please stop acting like everything in this house is yours now?" And then she started crying. Loud, helpless sobs that brought mom and dad running like someone had been attacked. And just like that, it was over for me. "She's always on edge," Clara sobbed. "I'm scared to even talk to her." Dad didn't even look at me. "Go pack a bag," he said quietly. I blinked. "What?" "You need time away. Maybe it's time you learned how the real world works." I looked to Mom, waiting for her to jump in. To say it was too much. But she only folded her arms. "We've tried. You're not willing to change. Maybe some space will help you grow up." I was 17. Not even legally an adult. But I nodded slowly, walked to my room, and started packing. No yelling. No pleading. Just silence and a numb, slow-burning ache. My best friend Tasha picked me up that night. Her family let me stay in their spare room, no questions asked. I told them it was temporary. A few weeks, maybe. But those weeks turned into months. I got a job at a bookstore downtown. Minimum wage, long hours, but I liked it. The quiet, the shelves, the feeling that I had control again, even if it was just over alphabetizing titles or helping customers find poetry collections. Tasha's parents were kind, but I could tell I was a guest. Always a guest. I missed my room. I missed my bed. I missed the feeling of being wanted, even if only by the walls that had watched me grow up. But more than anything, I waited. Not for an apology. Not even for a call. I just wanted something, anything, to show that they missed me. Weeks passed. Then months. Nothing. Until one afternoon, nearly 6 months after I left, Tasha burst into the bookstore, panting and wide-eyed. "You are not going to believe this," she said, dragging me outside by the arm. "Clara. Your parents. They're on the news." I didn't believe her at first. I stood there on the sidewalk, blinking in the late afternoon sun, trying to process what Tasha had just said. "What do you mean, they're on the news?" I asked, brushing the dust off my apron. "Like on TV?" Tasha pulled out her phone and shoved it into my hands. "Watch it." It was a short local segment, one of those 5-minute fillers they play between major stories. The reporter stood in front of our old neighborhood, right across the street from the house I used to call home. The words "family targeted in fraud investigation" ran across the bottom of the screen. The footage cut to Clara, standing in the driveway with her arms folded and a scowl on her face, muttering something while cameras snapped. Behind her, my parents stood close together, trying to smile, trying to look innocent. But it was clear they weren't in control of the narrative anymore. According to the report, the school Clara had been accepted into, that advanced STEM program she'd bragged about, had recently begun auditing applications after a tip-off from an anonymous email. Several applicants were suspected of using embellished or fabricated information. Clara's name had come up among the first. I paused the video. I stared at her face, that same expression she used to make when she didn't get her way, and felt a strange mix of emotions: shock, disbelief, and something darker. Not quite satisfaction, not quite revenge, but maybe something like justice. The next part of the story unraveled quickly. Clara had apparently lied on her application. Not just exaggerated, full-blown fiction. She had listed science competitions she never entered, awards she never won, and volunteer hours at a community tech center that didn't exist. But what made it worse, what turned it into a headline, was the fact that the application had clearly been written by someone older. An adult. My parents had helped her. Tasha and I sat on the curb outside the bookstore as she filled me in on the rest. She'd seen it spreading online, local forums, school gossip groups, even on Twitter. People were furious. Parents whose kids had been rejected by the program were calling for Clara to be expelled and for my parents to face consequences. "Your dad could lose his job," Tasha said quietly. "The company he works for is all about ethics and corporate transparency. This isn't a good look." I nodded, my thoughts spinning. It wasn't just the lie. It was the lengths they had gone to help her, even while kicking me out for being difficult. All those nights I'd watched them bend over backward for her, defend her, treat her like she walked on clouds, and now they were standing in front of a reporter, caught in the fallout of their own creation. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it or text them a sarcastic "I told you so." Instead, I went home with Tasha and sat on her back porch for hours, watching the sky turn from pink to gray, thinking about the last 2 years of my life. Thinking about all the times I'd asked myself if I was the problem. If I was too angry, too jealous, too cold. But now I knew. It wasn't about me not getting along with Clara. It was about them choosing convenience over truth. Choosing the child who made them feel good about themselves over the one who challenged them to be better. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a handwritten note from my mother. "I know you've seen what's happening. I don't expect you to forgive us. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. You were right to feel pushed out. I just didn't want to admit what was happening in our house." Clara was struggling. We thought if we gave her everything, it would make up for what she never had. But we gave her too much. And we gave you too little. I don't expect a response. But I hope you're okay. I read the letter 3 times. The handwriting was shaky. The ink smudged in places, like maybe she had cried while writing it. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that. Still, something inside me softened. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to let me exhale. I didn't write back. Not then. Instead, I threw myself into work. The store offered me more hours. I took them. I started reading more, sketching again. Even took on a small freelance job doing illustrations for a local children's author. It wasn't much money, but it felt like a door opening. For once, the future didn't feel like something other people got to have. And then, one rainy morning in October, I ran into Clara. I was leaving the coffee shop near the bookstore when I saw her through the window, sitting alone, stirring a paper cup. Her hair was shorter. Her shoulders slumped. She looked smaller than I remembered. She looked up and saw me. Our eyes met. And for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she got up and walked out, her cup still in her hand. "Hey," she said, standing in front of me. "Can we talk?" I hesitated. But something in her voice, it wasn't the usual dramatic tone. It was quieter. Real. We sat on the bench outside, under the awning, while the rain whispered around us. "I didn't think you'd stop," she said. "I didn't think you'd ask." She gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "Fair." We sat in silence for a while. Then she looked down at her hands. "I messed everything up," she said. "I wanted them to love me. I thought, if I could be perfect, they wouldn't send me away again." I looked at her. Really looked. She was still the same Clara, but not the version I'd fought with. This one was cracked around the edges. "They were never going to send you away," I said. "You were the miracle." She frowned. "You think that?" "I know that." She bit her lip. "I didn't mean for you to get kicked out." "You cried," I reminded her. "And they listened." "I was scared," she said quietly. "And jealous. You had all these things I didn't, your art, your friends, your independence. I didn't know how to be around that. I thought if I made them think I was the one who needed protecting." She trailed off. I waited. "They'd choose me." "They did." "I know." The silence between us was heavy. Not angry. Just full. Then she stood. "I don't expect you to forgive me either. But I'm sorry. For everything." She walked off before I could respond. I sat there for a long time after she left. And for the first time since I was thrown out of my own home, I felt something begin to close, not in a bad way. Like a chapter finally reaching its last page. It's strange how closure never comes the way you expect. I didn't wake up the next morning with everything suddenly fixed. There was no great epiphany or cinematic moment where the world made sense. But something had shifted. Clara's apology wasn't redemption, but it was the first honest thing between us in years. And in that honesty, a door cracked open, not to let her back in, but to let the resentment start to seep out. I kept moving forward. The bookstore job turned into a promotion. I started managing the weekend shifts, training new hires, even helping with events. The children's author whose book I illustrated liked my work so much she introduced me to her publisher. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a casual connection, but it was the first thread in a web I never saw coming. In the background, the storm around Clara and my parents hadn't quite passed. The school had rescinded her program offer, which meant she lost the scholarship tied to it. The university she planned to attend later that year put her application on indefinite hold. It wasn't just the lie itself, it was the implication that it was a pattern. If she had forged one path, who was to say others weren't manipulated too? My father resigned from his job. Quietly, no scandal, but I heard through mutual friends that the company gave him the option: step down now or face internal review. He chose the former. I imagine he thought that was the dignified route. Maybe it was. My mother, meanwhile, had retreated from most social circles. Tasha's mom ran into her once at the grocery store. Said she looked like someone walking underwater, slow, blurry, detached. Still, no one from my family reached out after that letter. No follow-ups. No birthday texts. No Christmas cards. I wasn't surprised. But the silence gave me space. And in that space, I started to rebuild myself from the inside out. It was nearly a year later when I got the call. I was sitting in the back of the bookstore, sipping a tea that had long gone cold, going over some sketch ideas for a new project, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have ignored it. But something, curiosity, instinct, made me pick up. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then, "Hi, it's your dad." I went still. His voice sounded different, hoarser, bolder, like someone who hadn't slept well in months. "I hope this isn't a bad time," he said quickly. "I just..." I didn't know if I should call. I almost didn't. I didn't say anything. Just waited. There's a lot I could say, he went on. Apologies. Explanations. But I know none of that really matters unless it comes with change. And I haven't earned the right to ask you for anything. Another pause. But your mom's been sick. For a while. She didn't want anyone to know. I felt something cold slide down my spine. What kind of sick? I asked. Breast cancer. She didn't tell even me until it had spread. She thought she could beat it quietly. That it would just be a rough few months. He cleared his throat. It's stage 4 now. I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked like thunder in my ears. I'm not asking you to come back, he said, voice cracking. But she's been asking for you. Just thought you should know. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. Just breathing. Just feeling. I didn't know what to do. Part of me felt like this was another trap, another emotional bait to pull me back into their world. But another part, the part that still remembered how my mother used to rub my back when I was sick, how she used to braid my hair before school, wondered if people deserved a chance to say goodbye. So I went. Not that day. Not even that week. But eventually, I got on a bus and made the long, slow ride back to the neighborhood I thought I'd left for good. The house looked the same, eerily so. Same chipped paint, same cracked garden gnome by the porch steps. But everything else was quieter. Dimmer. Dad opened the door, and for the first time in a long time, he looked small. Not just older, diminished. Like the weight of everything had carved him down to size. Thank you for coming, he said. I nodded and stepped inside. The living room was familiar but hollow. Some of the furniture was gone. The bookshelf I used to dust every weekend now sat half empty. Clara wasn't there. She's living with her aunt now, Dad said as if reading my mind. Took some time off. Needed distance. I wasn't sure if he meant from them or from herself. Maybe both. Mom was in the back bedroom, propped up with pillows, pale and thin. She looked like a ghost of herself, but when she smiled, I saw flashes of the woman I used to know. You came, she whispered. I sat beside her and nodded. I did. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. You don't have to forgive me. I needed to see you. One more time. I didn't say anything. Just held her hand. And for the next hour, we talked. About nothing. About everything. And somehow, that was enough. When I left that day, I knew I wouldn't go back again. Not because I hated them. But because some things can be acknowledged without being restored. Some people need to live with their choices, not out of punishment, but because that's how they grow. I moved to a new city a few months later. The publisher offered me a part-time illustrating contract. I took it. Rented a small studio apartment above a bakery. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I wasn't living in the shadow of someone else's expectations. Karma didn't come in lightning bolts or loud declarations. It came slowly. Quietly. In lessons learned in bridges burned. In apologies whispered through hospital walls. In silence heavy enough to hear your own thoughts again. And in knowing that I, the one they cast out, had survived. Had become more. It's funny how healing doesn't come all at once, it arrives in fragments. Sometimes it's the taste of your first coffee in a new apartment, when there's no one judging what time you drink it. Sometimes it's the way the light filters through the curtains at 6 a.m., when you realize you finally slept through the night without dreaming of slammed doors or whispered arguments. Sometimes it's just a silence that feels peaceful instead of heavy. After my mother passed, I didn't go to the funeral. I thought about it. A lot. I imagined the service, the flowers, the polite nods of neighbors and distant relatives. I imagined Dad standing stiff in a suit, Clara possibly sitting in the front row, and the gentle words from someone who didn't really know her at all. In the end, I decided not to put myself through it. I had already said goodbye. And I wasn't ready to stand in a room full of people pretending everything had been fine. Instead, I took a sketchbook and went to a park near my new place, a quiet, tree-filled corner of the city that overlooked a small pond. I sat on a bench and drew the things I remembered about my mom that had nothing to do with the years that broke us. Her laugh when we used to dance in the kitchen. The way she tucked her feet under herself on the couch. The sound of her voice humming when she folded laundry. I drew for hours. Not to forget, but to remember on my terms. When the sun dipped low, I closed the sketchbook and whispered, "Goodbye." And that was enough. Work picked up. The small contract with the publisher turned into something more regular. I started illustrating full-time. Picture books, covers, even a graphic novel for a young adult series. I was still getting used to calling myself an artist professionally, but there was a quiet thrill in seeing my name in print. I even got invited to speak at a local creative conference, something small, mostly community-based, but it felt like a milestone. I stood in front of a room full of strangers and told my story. Not all of it. Not the family parts. But the part where I'd found myself again after being told I wasn't enough. A few people came up afterward. One woman said, "Your voice, it reminded me that it's okay to start over." That stayed with me. A year passed. Then another. Clara reached out once. She sent a message through email, short and awkward, but honest. "I don't know where you are in your life, and I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know I'm in therapy. Real therapy, not school counseling. And I'm trying to figure out who I am outside of the stories people used to tell for me." She didn't ask for a response. I didn't send one. But I didn't delete it either. Some things don't need immediate answers. Just space to breathe. Dad never reached out again. I think, in his own way, he believed that one phone call telling me about Mom was his penance. Maybe it was. Or maybe he just didn't know how to repair a relationship that had snapped clean through. Either way, I didn't wait for a second call. I had stopped waiting for people to return what they'd never known how to give. Instead, I built my own version of family. Tasha and I remained close. She ended up moving to my city a year after I did, landed a job in digital marketing and found an apartment just a few blocks away. We joked sometimes that we'd end up living in the same retirement home, still bickering over which tea is better. We took road trips, real ones. With playlists and snacks and badly folded maps. We visited coastal towns, mountain lakes, art museums and places we couldn't pronounce. Every mile was a reminder that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person who sees the worst of you and stays anyway. I also started teaching art workshops at a local community center. Kids mostly. Some teens. A few adults trying to rediscover the hobbies they'd given up on years ago. One afternoon, a girl about 10 years old raised her hand and said, "Is it okay if I'm bad at this?" I smiled. "It's more than okay," I told her. "It means you're trying something that matters." She beamed and went back to her messy, beautiful painting. That's when I realized something. The pain I'd carried, the years of feeling like a guest in my own life, hadn't just disappeared. But it had transformed. It had become fuel. Purpose. A reason to make sure no one else ever felt like they didn't belong in their own story. One winter evening, I got a letter in the mail. No envelope. Just folded paper with my name scrawled across the top. Inside was a printed article. Clara J. Thompson speaks out on academic pressure and redemption, a former student's journey. There was a yellow sticky note attached with a handwritten line, "Thought you might want to see how far we've come." No signature. But I knew it was her. The article was surprisingly candid. Clara talked about everything, the lies, the guilt, the therapy, the way she had to rebuild her identity from scratch. She talked about growing up in a house where validation was currency, and how it turned her into someone who thought worth had to be proven, not felt. She didn't make excuses. She just told the truth. At the end of the article, she said something that stopped me cold. The person I hurt the most never wanted revenge. She just wanted to be seen. I didn't understand that back then. I do now. And I'm still learning. I folded the article and placed it in a small box under my bed, the one where I keep keepsakes that don't quite belong anywhere else but are too important to throw away. Not forgiveness. Not friendship. Just a thread. And sometimes, a thread is enough to keep the past from unraveling the future. It's hard to explain the feeling of peace when you've lived without it for so long. It's not loud. It doesn't arrive like a drumbeat or a dramatic sunrise. It shows up in small, unannounced moments, when your favorite mug is clean, when the rain hits the window just right, when you realize you haven't thought about the past in days. Weeks, even. That's where I found myself now. 2 years after I left my parents' house with 2 garbage bags and a numb heart. The girl who once stood in the middle of her own room, watching her world fall apart, was gone. In her place was someone different. Someone steadier. Not invincible, but intact. My apartment was still small. The ceiling leaked a little when it stormed. My radiator clicked like it was trying to communicate with ghosts. But it was mine. Every picture on the wall, every chipped plate, every plant I kept forgetting to water, all of it was chosen by me. And that, I realized, was what healing looked like. Not erasing the past. Just being able to live with it. That spring, I finished illustrating my first full-length children's book. It was a story about a girl who didn't fit in, not at home, not at school, but found a hidden garden where everything bloomed in its own way. I poured my heart into it. When it hit the shelves, I got a letter from a teacher who used it in her class. She wrote, "One of my students said, I think this book was written by someone who understands me." I cried when I read that. Not because I was sad, but because it felt like something had come full circle. All the moments that broke me, they had become fuel. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Just quiet power. The kind that builds instead of destroys. One evening, I got a message from Clara again. This time, a voice note. "Hey. I know it's been a while. I wanted to tell you that I graduated last week. Not from the program I thought I'd be in, but one I earned on my own. No shortcuts. No lies. And I couldn't stop thinking about how you always tried to be honest even when no one believed you. I wanted to be angry at you for so long because it was easier than being angry at myself. But now I understand. I hope you're still drawing. I hope you're happy. I think you deserve to be. That's all. Bye." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Sometimes peace is letting things end on almost. Almost reconciled. Almost whole. Almost close enough to touch, but not needing to. As for my father, I haven't heard from him since the call about Mom. I sometimes imagine he still lives in that house, in the same silence he once used to shut me out. I don't hate him. I don't think he's evil. I think he was a man who made choices based on what he thought was right and couldn't admit when he was wrong. That's a kind of prison too. And I don't need to visit it. Years later, I stood in a bookstore, not the one I worked at, but a larger one in another city, where my second book was featured on a display table. A little girl picked it up while her mother looked through travel guides. She flipped through the pages, stopped at one illustration, a scene of a girl standing in a garden, her eyes wide with wonder, and smiled. That's when I knew. Everything that happened, every wound, every silence, every door closed in my face, it had shaped me. Not into something broken. Into something real. Something with edges and weight and value. People talk about karma like it's cosmic punishment. A boomerang that hits people back for what they've done. But sometimes, karma is just truth. Patience. The slow, steady work of the world setting itself right again. They kicked me out. But life let me in. Not with fanfare or applause. Just quietly. Gently. Like a door I didn't know was mine to open all along. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.